Welcome back, everyone, to the Burnout Club. This is the place where we explore burnout and success, one expert and experiment at a time. I'm your host, Patrice Bonfilio, and today I'm joined by Jason Shupp. Jason, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure to join you on your show.
Thanks. I immediately liked Jason the moment I met him. We met at PodCon, of all places, because we're both podcasters. And Jason has a show called From There to Here. It's about unconventional origin stories. And I was lucky enough to actually be on that show and found it to be really cathartic, reflecting back on my own origin story. So I think it must be amazing for you to hear everyone's story. Tell us about how you started that podcast.
The podcast originally came to be, a slightly longer version of the story is I was interested in writing a book. And right around that time was when I got connected to Mission Matters, which is the podcast network that we are both on. And I got approached to them to do one of their podcasts. And part of the application process was if you're interested in writing a book. And I said, yeah. And I got contacted immediately and ended up writing a chapter in one of their anthology series, which I was going to use as a precursor for my own book project I wanted to get into. But right after that book was published, they being Mission Matters was wanting to start their podcast network. And they reached out to some of their authors and said, are you interested? And I said, yeah, that sounds like a really fun creative project to continue. And I shelved that book project for the time being and pursued the podcast. I knew I wanted to do something creative. I was pretty burned out, which is appropriate for your podcast.
Yeah.
I was pretty burned out from the tactical and strategic components of running a business for as long as I did. And there was a lot of other recent backstory with some family business, dynamics and drama that I was navigating. And I needed something creative, something artistic, something a passion project for me so that I could find that release, that decompression. And the podcast provided that in ways that I never would have imagined with how I originally went into the process and how my shows evolved into letting me have those really amazing conversations and empathetic conversations that I get to have with my guests as they share very transparently and vulnerably their origin story.
It's almost hard not to become vulnerable when you think about yourself as a child and when you're navigating, not knowing what to do and forming who you are. I think it made me give myself more grace now because I tend to be a very intense person and very driven. It's just like, wow, I have become the person I think my parents wanted me to be. Like, oh, I have done a lot. Let's just, take a moment and be happy. Like that was very, very needed, I think, for me when I went on your show and had the time to actually think through that. So big thank you to you for that one.
Yeah, well, you're very welcome. I found a lot of people even those who've been reluctant to do the show for various reasons, have really appreciated the opportunity just to be heard for an hour. And I've realized after doing over 70 episodes, how many people really haven't had the opportunity to just talk and someone just to listen with no agenda other than just to truly listen and authentically want to understand what they're wanting to share. And it's been very powerful being on the other side of the table. And I'm honored to be involved in those conversations. But I think a lot of people just want to be heard, and we aren't conditioned as a society to really let people be heard. And we're not trained to listen either, as it seems.
That's definitely true. Yeah. So what have been the most surprising or I guess biggest takeaways from what people have told you? Like, is there some sort of common thread or something that you've taken into your own life?
Oh, there's so many. I think one of the common threads, and this will sound like a softball response, but there's so many similarities. And what's interesting is the different journeys that everyone took to get to a lot of the same places. So a lot of the takeaways that guests will share or will be extracted from just a story that they have are very similar to what other people said, but their journey was so significantly different to get to the same place. And there's others that have had very similar journeys,
Yeah.
but their response and their takeaway, because of the context of their life, it took them to very, different places. So one of the big takeaways for me is just context is so important and nuance
Yeah.
is so important. And you really have to understand that to truly have empathy and understand where someone is at and why they have the perspectives that they do. There's a lot of other, specific takeaways that could be, resilience, the importance of that, the importance of, being authentic and true to yourself, the importance of having advisors and mentors in your life and listening
Mm.
to people like that. So there's a lot of those type of takeaways, but I think context and nuance is probably the biggest thread that runs through almost everyone's journey.
That makes sense. I find the same thing with the burnout guests. Like it doesn't matter what industry people are coming from or walk of life. There's very similar things happening, and like the emotions are similar. It's just there's different contexts to when and how it happens. But that human experience, you really can't change that. We're all going through it. Yeah. So I think I'm also taking away a form of empathy I maybe didn't have before. That's that's certainly something that we can all benefit from. So tell me a little bit more about the project that you were thinking about with the book. I'm kind of intrigued by what topic you were thinking about for that. We might see it again one day.
I will say I'm working on a different book project that will come to fruition. The
Mm.
original idea that I had was, I'm not really a new parent now. I mean, my son will be 11 next month. But at the
Oh,
time
nice.
that I'd been working on it, and so I was taking notes, since he was like 2 or 3, so it was kind of this long process, was the synergy between parenting and being a business owner or entrepreneur, or I guess
Mm.
maybe even like a high level manager. That there's
Yeah.
so many things I would see in my child that were really just smaller versions of problems or conversations I have with employees. And I do
Hmm.
believe, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems, and we're just big kids. But
Hmm.
there's so many things that as a CEO, I would take some of those things and apply to my parenting, but then the, opposite was true where I would parent
Yeah.
my son in certain ways and I'd be like, "Oh, I need to take this dynamic into the office and have the
Yeah.
same result that I did with my child." So I was cataloging all these different developmental milestones in his life at different ages and correlating them with different business experiences that I had or personnel experiences that I had. And I wanted to
Yeah.
put something together from that. And then, and then I ended up doing the Mission Matters chapter and then the podcasting, and then that completely took over from that book project. Different life events took me
Yeah.
in another direction with my future book project, but I don't want to say I've completely scrapped it, but I certainly have tabled it and put it pretty far back on the table.
Got it. Well, if you do write it, I would read that. I found the same thing where you can transfer knowledge back and forth. Actually, it's almost like an experiment itself, going through running a business and becoming a parent, or like just being a parent at the same time.
I
Yeah,
probably should maybe do an anthology book with that, and I could see myself finishing that project if I collaborate with a bunch of others, and we all
yeah,
share our different stories where I'm not doing all the heavy lifting to put a whole book together.
yeah,
So now that we're kind of talking, maybe I actually will move that a little bit farther
yeah,
ahead on the timeline, and it looks like I have a co-author, so thank you.
yeah. Done, done. We're doing it. That's great. So, like you mentioned your business life. Talk a little bit about that too. And I think anytime we say the word business or running something, there's going to be some burnout involved there. What were some takeaways, or what do you feel comfortable sharing about the business?
Yeah, I've shared some of the tactical parts of this story
Mhm.
in different environments, and I'll pull the veil back in slightly different ways for you. So again, context is everything, and
Mhm.
I'll try and be very succinct. So I'm part of a third generation business. I'm the
Mm.
third generation. My brother was the other part of the third generation, and now I've been involved with the business for about 20 years. And when him and I were running the business, and we're very different people. We complement each other in some ways, but we're also very different. We're certainly my parents' children, but we diverged after that. And at some point during the journey, we just started ideologically not operating well together, and it was affecting
Mhm.
The business is affecting my mental health, which happens in a lot of family businesses and a lot of third generations because like only like
Oh, yeah.
14% of them survive.
Oh,
Things came to
wow.
a head and we realized we couldn't work together anymore. And through that process, it got very, very toxic. It got very, very tense, very ugly. The rest of the family gets pulled into this.
Hmm.
It's always interesting to see where people's perspectives are in the family on where they align themselves, and just got very, very rough, and to the point where we essentially agreed to sell the business. And I learned in that journey that there was no way I was going to be able to sell the business and still operate it unless I had control of the business. So it became a process of how do I exit my brother from the business and trying
Hmm.
to do it in the most responsible way possible
Hmm.
for the business, but also again it's a family too, so you want to try and protect that.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
well, during that process, I hit what I would consider the closest I could get to a mental breakdown. I say I don't think I'm capable of that, but that would be arrogant. It just takes
Hmm.
the right levers and buttons to get anyone to that point.
Yeah.
But I was at the point where I literally just when I say I didn't care about the business, it's hard to say that as a third generation owner who's very much invested in the business and what the brand
Yeah.
represents and what it means to the community. But I
Hmm.
just I didn't care about I just knew I had to get out from underneath the current situation I was in. And that could
Right.
have been just putting chains on the door. And, if employees just show up and suddenly they can't get in, oh, well, I literally did
Hmm.
not care. And it was a weird place to be when I hit that rock bottom, because when I say I didn't care, there's a difference between when people say that they don't care and that when they say that up until when the consequences happen and suddenly they care, versus when
Yeah.
you truly don't care, expecting the worst consequences to actually happen. And so
Yeah.
it's coming. You're going to get kicked in the teeth, is
Hmm.
which is what I anticipated. But once I got to that
Hmm.
point, it was it was strangely very liberating in the
Mm.
kind of freedom that you have when you're no longer bound by fear of all these things that you think that you wouldn't want to have happen that might.
Yeah.
You just aren't phased by that anymore, and it suddenly
Hmm.
creates more options. It's it's kind of like the evil twin of when people talk about being in the flow, where you're
Yeah.
just in the flow and in sync, and you're not thinking about what could happen because you're just there. I mean,
Hmm.
you're just right there, and athletes talk about that a lot.
Yeah.
It's kind of the evil twin of that, where you're in the flow, but it took really dark circumstances to get there. I don't recommend people, finding
No.
that that
The
space in their
dirt
head,
flow.
going that route. But it was really powerful and very liberating, where it's like, I'm good. I've resigned myself to whatever the universe is gonna be with
Hmm.
this decision, that I am not going to be burdened by the conditions of this business, and I'm
Mm.
prepared for whatever contingencies. It was very liberating. And once I accepted that, I was able to start moving forward and make decisions that ultimately led me to, buying my brother out, which happened like 3 weeks before COVID started, navigating through
Oh,
COVID.
wow.
And then ultimately, I ended up selling the majority interest of the business about 4 years later. But that was done in a very healthy, strategic way that was
Hmm.
in the best interest of not only serving where I needed to go as an exiting owner, but also for the business to continue. But that unicorn situation that happened with that merger never would have happened if I wouldn't have been at that point of shedding my fear
Hmm.
of what could be and just accepting that the universe is going to do what it will, and I will move forward and deal with whatever that is.
Yeah. That's powerful. How were you able to, I guess, come back from that? Right. So, like, I completely understand, right? Once you're resigned for it and you know whatever's going to happen is going to happen, talk a little bit about, like, I guess, exiting that and thawing what had kind of been frozen, I guess, theoretically.
That's a good question. I've dubbed what I went through, and actually wrote about this in the Mission Matters chapter. I dubbed it
Well,
ETSD, Entrepreneurial Traumatic Stress Disorder, which I believe is a real thing.
I
And
think so.
and I kind of came out of it probably what I would imagine for those who've gone through some other version of post-traumatic stress. And again, I don't want to equate what I went through to others that have gone through very different versions of very real dark trauma.
Hmm.
But there's a healing process that comes through that. And I don't know if I can articulate it in a like a sequential, here are my takeaways, here's my 12-step program that I went through
Yeah.
that may or may not work for you. I don't think I could
Yeah.
frame it like that. It was really just like I said, first I was able to shed my fear because I
Hmm.
was just prepared for the outcome. I accepted the outcome, or what was
Yeah.
a potential and very likely outcome of just the business shutting down and all the
Hmm.
dominoes that would start getting knocked over with that event.
Hmm.
So once I just accepted that, I was prepared to start moving forward again. And it was
Hmm.
just one step in front of the other. And again, another cliche response, but that's how you get down any trail, is just one step in front of the other. And which each step you take, you get a little bit stronger. And then
Hmm.
you figure out, well, your pack's automatically a little bit lighter, to use that analogy, because
Yeah.
once you dump the fear and the stress that comes with what if, or all of that uncertainty. There's still uncertainty, but there's
Hmm.
uncertainty when you're distracted by it, versus uncertainty of you're not sure what the outcome's going to be, but you're moving forward, comfortable with
Hmm.
whatever that outcome may be. So the pack that I was carrying, and metaphorically speaking, was automatically lighter.
Yeah.
And now I'm just starting to move forward. And with each step, I get a little bit stronger because I'm walking, and I'm just getting, again, metaphorically fitter as I'm moving
Hmm.
again. And then you start to find successes, and you start to
Hmm.
celebrate those successes. And then you start to find, joys in a way that you didn't. And
Hmm.
you just start to find yourself again. I remember
Oh,
one
interesting.
employee telling me that she framed it, essentially like it's good to see that you finally got the stick out of your ass. And I can't remember the conversation that we were having and what I was doing that was markedly different from what I was doing a year or two before.
Yeah.
But it really resonated with me. Partly like, wow, I just was told that by an employee. But the other
Right.
part was, wow, I didn't realize that I was that off my game. I knew I was,
Hmm.
but I thought I buffered, the public for most of that. But
Yeah.
apparently they saw through, this facade, and you just start
Hmm.
to find yourself again, and
Hmm.
then you start going back into those habits that made you who you once were. You
Hmm.
start seeking advice from others and start reading more and
Hmm.
start, working out more and start, engaging in your relationships and the energy that you get from that. And it
Hmm.
just continues to spool up. And then one day you wake up and you're the person that you remember being, or a
Hmm.
version of it that you're just as proud to be.
Yeah. That's beautiful. How maybe bouncy is too light of a word for it, but how we can just regain ourselves again. Did you find that it was a similar process, step by step, tackling the family side of it? Because I imagine there's going to be a decent amount of listeners that also have family businesses, maybe not third generation, but, they're dealing with similar issues. And, even in my industry, there's a lot of interpersonal things that happen in a business that you need to work through as well, just like business problems. So was it that same sort of path where you're just going to take one step at a time with your brother and the rest of the family?
Sort of. And again, this is where I think every situation is going to be very nuanced. My
Mhm.
brother was having a lot of health issues around the time, and some of those affected his mental state, is probably the best way to put it. And
Mhm.
I knew
Yeah.
that we would never recover our relationship. And I don't think
Mhm.
he was at a position that it wasn't just emotional. There was a
Yep.
cognitive component where we would never have the opportunity to sit down and work through it. So that relationship, unfortunately, was never
Mhm.
going to recover. He passed away about 2 years after I bought him out. So
Sorry to hear that.
I appreciate that, but I don't think time would have changed
Mhm.
where we were. That relationship, unfortunately, essentially dissolved, and was
Mhm.
very sad about that.
Yeah.
My father was actually a different situation. There was a point where I remember standing in the front lot of the office, and he said one thing to me that I took great offense to. And as he walked away
Mhm.
from me, I didn't quite say, but I said in my head, it was basically just, essentially go to hell. It was more colorful than that, which is what I said in my head.
Mhm.
Um, And I called my mom directly afterwards and I said, I'll have a indifference to him, like a polite indifference is a term I
Mhm.
used, where
Yeah.
I'm not invested in him anymore.
Mhm.
I won't go out of my way to be mean, but I'm not going to engage with him similar to how I
Mhm.
would with a server at a restaurant. Like I'll be very, very
Yeah.
polite, but I'm not going to invest into really
Mhm.
trying to build a relationship.
Yeah.
Fortunately, over time, about a year or so later, we just started settling back into having a relationship. And I'm
Mm.
really glad that I never got in an apology, and I never would if you knew my father, that wouldn't happen. But I'm very glad
Yeah.
that I got over myself because my
Mm.
father actually passed away
Oh,
early
geez.
last year. But we had the
Sorry.
opportunity to. We never formally acknowledged it, but we
Mhm.
we informally appreciated, and I believe mutually appreciated that we became father and son again, and we had
Mhm.
good moments before he passed away. And I'm really glad that I didn't
Mhm.
let the need for an apology or this very
Mhm.
specific conversation to happen the way that I feel like it should happen to
Yeah.
get that kind of closure. I'm glad that I just let things be. Otherwise, that would
Mhm.
be a regret that I would carry to my grave.
Yeah. That's a gift you gave yourself, right? I
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And my mom is just there were some things that I wasn't very excited about on her perspective on some things, but
Mhm.
my mother has always just been the most amazing mother, and
Mhm.
I appreciate her so much that she got the mom pass. I didn't let that impact our relationship at all. I love her dearly, and always have,
Yeah.
and I don't feel compelled to rehash any of this stuff and try and get her to understand certain things from my
Mhm.
perspective. It's like, Mom, we're good, and
Yeah.
will be, for the rest of our lives.
Yeah. Oh, that's sweet as a mom to hear, right? The love for the mother. But really, I mean, just deciding to kind of move on with your dad in a healthy way was a gift to your mother as well. Like, I'm sure that really did a lot for her psyche.
I suspect so. Actually, I haven't asked her that. She's actually coming into
Mhm.
town tomorrow.
Oh.
This may be a catalyst to have some of those conversations to see. I'm sure she does appreciate that there wasn't that overt tension, but I haven't specifically asked
Mhm.
her about how she really feels about it. Part of it is
Yeah.
I want to let sleeping dogs lie. I mean, she
Oh,
did lose her
absolutely.
son and her husband in about a 2-year span, and
Yeah.
business is always connected to that. You can't
Mhm.
you can't separate the business and the family. So, um,
Mhm.
I don't know. I'll have to reflect on that to see if that conversation comes up.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever had your mom on your podcast? Like, do you know her origin story?
I have not, and it's something that I have thought about doing.
Mhm.
I really wanted to do it for my father because he has the more traditional business entrepreneur story, and so it was a very natural fit. And I thought it
Mhm.
would have been a great thing to do for like a Father's Day,
Mm.
timing to drop the episode.
Yeah.
And I didn't get around to it. And that's one of the things where I really kicked myself because there's a lot that
Mhm.
I don't know about him.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of knowledge about the business that died with him. And
Mhm.
as I said, we've recently partnered with another business. So we're in what I call a blended fourth generation. The business that bought the majority stake is a family business. And so as they
Mhm.
now steward the business, there's a lot of this institutional and family and generational knowledge that went with him
Mhm.
that I wasn't able to capture. And that really saddens me. And there's
Yeah.
also, other family members that probably didn't get a chance to really know him. Like my son, barely knew him, and I would love for him to
Mm.
know my father through his words. So I really do need to do that with my mother. I haven't decided exactly how I want to format that show,
Yeah.
but that legacy preservation is something that's very topical with me.
Yeah. I always wish I when I was on your podcast I did share this, but my father died when I was 10. So the opportunity to have my kids meet my dad just was never in the cards at all. I wish that there was some sort of video or podcasting at the time where I could have shared that legacy with them. So, if you can squeeze it in,
I will
do
I will make that happen.
it. So, I mean, I appreciate you for being so open and honest about all this. What about some of the like brighter points? What do you infuse into your life to make you laugh, make you smile, energize you? Anything like that?
Well, things that energize me. I really believe in, we'll call it wellness. It's probably a better
Hmm.
term than health, as just
Hmm.
a regiment of like just your daily regimen. It's not something that I try and do as like a fad basis, like, work it
Yeah.
in, until a certain point. So, I'm always trying to make sure that, I'm nutritionally on point, that I'm, physically doing what I need to do to stay, active and agile and mobile and things like
Hmm.
that I'm creatively trying to keep my brain working. I'm still
Hmm.
tethered to the business, and I enjoy that because it keeps me thinking strategically and
Hmm.
tactically. I like to be involved in the podcast scene and the relationships I have because it lets me really just be creative all the time. So I'm just trying to make sure that I have these daily or weekly or monthly rituals so that I'm always trying to stay with a baseline of wellness.
Hmm.
Most of my hobbies are high speed, high risk, high consequence types of
Oh,
activities,
really?
which uh,
Okay.
which I thoroughly enjoy. So those always help keep me on my edge and always keep me motivated to do the other things I need to do to have that baseline level of wellness. Because if I'm
Hmm.
not operating at a certain level, the things that I
Yeah.
do for fun could kill me pretty quickly. So,
Oh, I need
so
to know
it's
more about these activities. What are you doing? What dangerous activities do you like?
uh, yeah, rock climbing,
Mm.
skydiving,
Oh my.
enduro, downhill mountain biking, off-road motorcycling, scuba diving,
Wow.
things like that.
Yeah, I mean, we could have a whole other podcast episode just following you around with your adventures. That's great. And I see how you are able to link like having that healthy regimen, like almost the accountability with your wellness routine and your hobbies. Like I feel like in some ways the accountability of having a podcast on burnout has made sure I handle burnout, in a way that I would probably deprioritize it if I didn't need to be talking about it and researching it and speaking to people. So that, I think that's very interesting. Probably true for a lot of people if they look at how they're setting up their lives. That's
Oh,
fascinating.
absolutely. And a lot of it's just about having goals. Like
Mm.
I'll do a random mountain bike race that has no interest in me other than that it's on the calendar and it reminds me that, well, I should probably be fairly prepared for it. So put in a
Mhm.
few extra miles on the bike or whatever it may be. Uh, so I agree wholeheartedly. Having those, whatever it is that you need to show up and be a decent version of yourself, helps you
Mhm.
on the off days do those little things that are gonna keep you there.
Yeah. Are there any activities or races that are on your bucket list that you'd like to do but haven't done yet?
I would say most of my bucket list stuff is doing things that I do on the regular, but in like certain locations. Like rock climbing, I've been to Yosemite, which is kind of one of the meccas for rock
Mhm.
climbing. But now I want to go take my son out there, and I want to experience
Oh,
that with
yeah.
him.
Mhm.
Like skydiving, you would think that, well, you're falling through the sky. It's pretty similar anywhere, but no, there's certain places and events I want to go to that I get a have certain views or go jump with certain people or jump out of certain aircraft. I want to go experience that.
Mhm.
So there's those different types of things. I just want to do more of what I do, but just in different places that will provide a different context to the experience
Yeah.
and heighten the level of community or engagement or the level of demands that are put upon me doing said activity because I'm now with certain people in a certain place. Uh,
Mhm. I love the idea of taking your son to Yosemite or just rock climbing in general. Like that multi-generation aspect to it, I think does enhance the activity and try to figure out ways to loop in my kids where I can. That's maybe you can take us
I,
along, send some photos of your adventure.
I I'm an advocate of high consequence stuff, and this isn't to suggest like death wish type things like that. Honestly,
Mm.
it's I mean I would get in my vehicle after doing skydives for a day and actually tell myself I need to pay attention because I have a higher chance of getting killed on the drive home than I do on a
Mm.
day's worth of jumps. So, but it's one of those things that if you're not prepared, things can go wrong. And I'm a big
Mhm.
believer in doing that, not just for myself, but encouraging others to do it because it suddenly puts things in perspective of what's really important. Like when people are like,
Hmm.
oh man, like shit's going wrong. It's like, well, really, is it? Like,
Yeah.
is anyone getting killed today? And not that should
Hmm.
be the gold standard of if it's a good day or a bad day, but it helps put
Hmm.
in perspective of, is this really going that wrong? Or is this
Yeah.
something we should get that worked up over? I mean,
Hmm.
okay, the copier machine's jammed. All right, let's dial it down a little bit. Yeah, we all want to take a baseball bat to like an office space, but we don't need to complain that much about it. And high consequence stuff is a good reset so that when you after you get done doing that, when you get back to the mundane of daily life that we all go through,
Hmm.
it just puts those things in perspective. And that's one of the things I want to, pass along to my son, which is why I introduce him to these activities, is so that
Hmm.
hopefully in his young mind he can start to appreciate that in time
Yeah.
of not only the things that you can control and what you can't control, but ultimately
Hmm.
what's really important and what doesn't require as much angst or energy.
I love that. Yeah, just training your brain how to stay calm and evaluate when it's really time to panic, right? There are times in life when maybe that's okay, but yeah, most times that's not helpful at all.
100%, 100%. Really quick anecdote about that. I was
Yeah.
in a plane one time, and I was talking to the pilot on the way up, and I was a novice jumper, and I was like, "Hey, at what point would we ever have to worry about like getting out of the plane, like if there's
Mhm.
an issue?" And he just said, "When you see my butt," which basically means when you see me already jump out, follow me. And I never forgot that because I use that
Mhm.
all the time when I talk with my team. And when they get excited, I'm like, "Do you see me stressing?" And they're like, "No."
Mhm.
Then you
Yeah.
shouldn't. Like, don't panic until I do. If I'm panicking,
Yeah.
there's something going on. And okay, what does it mean that could impact your day or your livelihood? But if I'm not
Mhm.
panicking, you're okay.
Yeah.
And it was a great lesson on like you said, learning the cues on when to panic.
Yeah. I love that sturdiness. Right? That's what people are looking for, right? They want, if you're going to be a leader, they want you to be sturdy and know that they can trust. Like you will tell them when something is a problem, right? You don't have to guess. That's great. And now that you mentioned the part about being a leader and the employees, how do you keep them inspired?
Wow, that's a really good question. I haven't had to think about it quite as much recently now that I'm
Mhm.
not the current steward of the business. So I'm having to reflect back a little bit to when that was a responsibility on my shoulders.
Yeah.
And I would say a big part of it is just trying to, well, I guess there's two sides of this coin. One, reminding them of the benefit of what we do. And as a business, we put roofs on and home exteriors and nothing very sexy, but if you look at the end result, we are providing comfort and security to people's home, and that's where their memories
Hmm.
happen. And
Yeah.
we know what the stress is like when things go wrong, and they have leaks or
Hmm.
something like that, and the panic it can cause. So we are providing that peace of mind, and so reminding people of what we're actually doing, that we actually have a very noble impact on the community. So that's a big part of the inspiration piece. And then another thing that I was always very conscious of is what can I do to remove friction in their life, and being very conscious of what am I doing as an owner or an operator or a manager that's making their life more difficult, whether it's a
Hmm.
process that they're doing that just makes their day a little bit harder, or whether it's a benefit that I need to rethink about because it just doesn't make sense and they may not get the work life balance that they are hoping for,
Hmm.
or whatever that could be. So, how can I reduce friction so that they can be the best versions of themselves at
Yeah.
work, but then also have more energy so they can be the best versions of themselves at home?
Hmm.
And then I say the last piece of that, I was always a big advocate for financial literacy and for that type of financial stewardship.
Hmm.
So I was always trying to encourage them to be conscious of essentially how they can build their own net worth and maximize their
Yeah.
opportunities and their resources, because that's really what
Hmm.
it's about. The more resources we have, the more that we can do, whether it's the more have fun we want to have, whether the more we want to do to contribute from a social justice or social awareness or
Hmm.
nonprofit type, social mission, however
Yeah.
they want to spend their resources, but just being aware of how do you build those resources and just
Hmm.
be your own financial steward. So that was always one thing I get on a soapbox about with them.
That is a very comprehensive answer. Right? You were saying you haven't thought about it in a while, but I think there are a lot of noble points in there. And it's a good reminder too for me, just because I'm in the finance industry, that there's so many industries out there that can benefit from that cross just exchange of information. So I'm going to noodle that a little bit. Maybe there's a way to make more happen there. I see the value in that for every single person. You're right.
Nice. We might have to have a few sidebar conversations on
Yeah.
that on a later date.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being so generous with your time already. Is there anything that you want to leave the listeners with?
Oh, the classic parting wisdom. I've asked that question so many times, and honestly have not reflected on that when I was preparing for your show. It'll probably be a relatively cliche response, but I would say the biggest thing, and it tied into to burnout, that I found for myself, and again, burnout's just a reflection of mental unwellness. And
Yeah.
I look at wellness across the board in all spectrums. So whether it's mental, physical, spiritual, financial, that we have to always be mindful of doing the best we can and stay as healthy as we can every day. Like, how do you avoid getting sick? It's not having better doctors and better medicine. It's what are you doing to prevent from being sick? So what I've learned from this experience, of course, I never applied as well as I'd like to universally,
Yeah.
but what can I do every day to put myself in the best place possible to be as successful as possible, so that whatever life throws at me, whether it's a virus that someone passes along, or the stock market drops, or you lose an account, with the business, that you are in the best place to handle that. And you can't build your immune system up in 24 hours. It's a process over time. So it's all the little things. Like, everything is just stick to your basics, be aware of the foundational things that you need to do to have wellness, and however you want to define it, and just take those small steps every day.
That's great. I love that. Yeah. So I will take your advice. I definitely need to. Small steps every day. And to all the listeners out there, thank you so much. Thank you to Jason. If anyone has a very interesting origin story, reach directly out to him for his amazing podcast, From There to Here. And for everyone listening to the Burnout Club, please rate it, review it, follow us. Thank you so much. Bye.